Tonight, a race against time to keep the home fires burning in Scunthorpe. The government says it's confident it can secure the material necessary to keep the plant's furnaces running, but faces questions about its long-term plan and what role China should play in the UK economy. Birmingham's bin misery set to continue after members of the Unite Union reject a proposed deal. Rishi Sunak's closest parliamentary aide when he was Prime Minister is among 15 people charged with election betting offences. I've done nothing wrong. The former anti-corruption minister Tulip Siddiq hits back after authorities in Bangladesh issued a warrant for her arrest. A committee of MPs reject what it calls baseless claims of two-tier policing during last summer's riots. But the Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick disagrees. I'll speak to him shortly. Plus, after Rory McIlroy's sensational Masters victory wins the praise of the US President, we look at the times politicians here have tried to gain a bit of borrowed glory from sporting champions. All that and more with our far from subpar duo of Caroline Flint and Fraser Nelson, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Ali Fortescue live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Politics Hub. Well, in Labour's manifesto, they said they would bring a long-term and strategic approach to managing our relations with China. And the question of how to deal with the world's second largest economy has rarely felt more relevant, as ministers effectively say that they can't trust China in our steel sector.
I wouldn't personally bring a Chinese company into our steel sector.
You would not bring a Chinese company?
I wouldn't. I think steel is a very sensitive area.
Well, that was the business secretary speaking to Trevor Phillips yesterday. This was China's foreign ministry today.
The two sides should resolve the issue based on mutual benefit. We hope the British government can trade with Chinese companies investing in the UK fairly and justly, protecting its legitimate rights and interests, and not turn them into political and security ones, and not undermine Chinese companies' confidence in investing in the UK.
But as this government looks for reliable trading partners in an unpredictable world, today, following the Chancellor's Beijing trip in January, the Trade Minister is in Hong Kong. Last year, the Prime Minister was the first to meet President Xi in 6 years.
I've been clear that I want a serious and pragmatic relationship with China. It's the second biggest economy in the world. It's one of our biggest trading partners, and therefore we have issues that we clearly need to discuss, whilst of course being clear about the issues that we do not agree on.
Well, a lot has obviously changed in the 5 months since then. In this brave new world of strongmen and tariffs, countries are looking inwards, protecting themselves. And on the weekend, the government took pretty extraordinary steps it might not have done not so long ago to protect steelmaking in this country. Well, our business and economics correspondent Paul Kelso has tonight's first report on the future of British steel.
Waiting to be shipped to Scunthorpe, some of the raw materials the government has spent the weekend scrambling to secure to protect the short-term future of British Steel's blast furnace plant. Literally keeping the home fires burning matters, because if these furnaces go out, the plant is dead. With fresh supplies of iron ore en route from Australia and coking coal from the United States, the Deputy Prime Minister is confident it has a future.
We've got the raw materials, they've been paid for, and we're confident that the furnaces will continue to fire. We've taken the action we've taken over the weekend. It was important that we did that. We secured the site.
Having seized control of the company from its Chinese owners at the weekend, the Prime Minister met new Chief Executive Alan Bell, on the right here. He will work alongside a team from consultants EY on short-term survival and a long-term plan, likely to start with nationalisation.
There's still a lot of discussion that needs to take place about what comes next. You know, what are the plans under this new rule of the Labour Party, the Labour government. So we're still waiting to get that detail as to what's going to follow after the weekend. But yeah, I think it's safe to say that we feel a lot more secure now than we did before.
Locally, there's relief that the plant and its 2,700 jobs have a reprieve.
It's having a real big impact. Our business has gone down by about 60% for the guys not coming out.
So my partner's worked there for, I think, about 2 years now. So we still don't know what the outcome is. We're still in that random space of, do they have jobs, do they not have jobs?
Ministers and management say their intervention is justified because only coal-fired Scunthorpe can produce the virgin steel used from railways to defence. But government support for Tata Steel's Port Talbot works will support a transition to electric arc furnaces fed with recycled steel, a potentially more sustainable alternative.
We've got the feedstock here. We don't have supplies of coke and iron ore, but we do have our own scrap. So we could be operating in a closed loop, powering it with renewables or nuclear, and then we would have a green, clean steel industry, which is categorically the way of the future.
With Scunthorpe losing £700,000 every day and Donald Trump's trade war deflating steel prices, forging a long-term future for the British steel industry remains an enormous challenge. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Well, a little bit earlier, I spoke to the former business secretary and former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Vince Cable. The business secretary has said that he wouldn't bring a Chinese company into the steel sector. Do you agree with that?
Well, we have. They're there, and they've been behaving badly. I mean, they're having turned down a government proposal and decided to walk away, which they're entitled to. I think they should have done it in an orderly way. So I think the way the government has intervened is quite correct. But having a general rule, Chinese companies can't be in the steel industry, that doesn't, I think, make a great deal of sense. We've got an Indian company in the other half of the basic steel industry. We welcomed Chinese investment when it was originally made because no one else was willing to take the company on. So I think it's not a general issue. It's the way that this particular company are behaving, which has caused the crisis and caused the government rightly to intervene.
So where would you draw the line then in terms of how involved China can be in sensitive industries?
Well, I think we already have national security safeguards. If there are particularly dangers around, I think, what are called killer switches in infrastructure industry, subject to the advice we get from our security services, we should make sure that our interests are properly safeguarded. But there is no reason why we should discriminate against China in particular. I mean, after all, we're in a very, very dangerous world at the moment. The United States has become a sort of rogue state. We've left the European Union. We have to hedge our economic bets and take investment where it's available, subject to proper controls.
You talk about us being in a sort of different, dangerous world. Do you think countries should be looking inwards more, being more protectionist?
No, I don't. And I think that for Britain, that is not the way forward. And I'm glad to see that's not what the government is trying to do. I mean, we were part of a trade bloc, the European Union, and that would have provided us with a kind of protection against outside shocks. But, we've decided to leave as a country. That's where we are. And we've got to try and establish relationships as best we can with other countries that are committed to maintaining an open trading and investment system. We can't turn inward.
In terms of the nationalisation of British Steel, do you think that's the direction the government should be going down? And do you think that's a long-term solution or just a sticking plaster?
Well, there aren't any easy solutions. We've tried numerous options with the steel industry. We've had British nationalisation, British private sector, a Dutch company, Chorus. We had private equity. We've had an Indian company. We've had a Chinese company. The simple truth is that Britain isn't a competitive steel producer. So if we decide to keep it, and I think there's a good reason for doing so, it's got to be recognising that it's not commercially competitive and it's going to have to be subsidised probably over a long-term period, whether it's privately or publicly owned. And I think the government has got to be honest and spelt out that large subsidies are going to be needed. They are either going to come from higher taxes or cuts in other public spending. And that's the brutal reality of the situation.
And how much do you think government intervention will cost?
Well, we're talking about millions a day. potentially billions. There was no point my putting a finger on it, but there are eventually two sources of cost here. I mean, in order to keep this industry remotely competitive, it's going to need very heavily capital investment. That was where the negotiations with the Chinese company and the Indian company were going. So we're talking billions to convert the blast furnaces into some greener technology or simply to modernize them. And then there's the running cost. At present world steel prices, British steel is not competitive. The energy costs are too high. We had to provide this kind of support when I was in government, and the problems continue to this day. And there's no easy way out of it.
Sorry to interrupt. Why do you think the British taxpayer should have to subsidise an industry that you say yourself isn't viable?
Well, it is a choice we have to make. I think if we didn't, we would be the last country in the G7 not to have an integrated steel industry. Now, you could make that choice. I mean, the Scandinavian countries manage without a steel industry. But I think steel is so interconnected with so many of the other things the government's trying to do in terms of railways, construction, and so on. The linkages are so big, the supply chains are so massive, the employment implications are so big. I think that the government actually can't afford to let it go. So I understand for both political and economic reasons why they've had to step in and why they're going to have to continue to step in.
I guess in terms of, I've got to ask, the failure of kind of long-term planning, British industrial strategy, that runs for decades, including when the coalition was in government, when you were business secretary. Do you feel partly responsible for any of this?
Well, I launched an industrial strategy when I was in government, and I wish we had one today. And the problem is governments have kept starting and stopping, so businesses don't know where they are. I mean, the point of having an industrial strategy is to give some long-term stability and certainty to business so they can make long-term investment decisions. And we achieved, I think, quite a lot when I was in government, certainly helping the car industry, the aerospace industry, biotech industries in that kind of way. And we badly need a return to that kind of approach. Simply talking to business about their long-term objectives is absolutely critical, particularly in a very turbulent and uncertain world that we have at the moment.
Well, the future of British Steel is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the Financial Times Whitehall editor Lucy Fisher. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Labour Minister Caroline Flint and Times columnist Fraser Nelson. Thanks both very much for joining me. We've got to start with steel. It's been quite an extraordinary couple of days, Fraser. The political cost right now for the government of this not working out quite high?
Well, right now they're reaping the political dividends. Keir Starmer's posing as the man who's saved the steel industry. Even Nigel Farage, who's arguing against it a couple of years ago, is now supporting it. So politically, this is the easy period where they can stand up as the saviours who took it away from the pernicious Chinese. Now, the problem's going to be when they admit how much it's going to cost, which they haven't done yet. In fact, to be honest, they haven't even nationalised it. What they've done is just simply taken control of a private company and passed an extraordinary law saying that they'll be punishable up to 2 years in prison if they don't do what the government says. So the debts aren't yet on the government's books. We don't know how much this is going to cost in terms of headroom or cuts to other public services or extra tax. So the bill hasn't come in, and when it does, that's when it gets politically trickier. And is there a bill that is too high? I mean, as you said, it's kind of a complex situation. It's not actually formally nationalised.
No, that's right, and Fraser's right and so is Vince right about the costs. It's undoubtedly a big cost, and a lot of that is attributed to the nature of the industry, but also they have massive energy costs. And there are examples, I have to say, of other countries, Germany being one, that subsidises the energy costs for their foundation industries, and this is a foundation industry. There's all types of different types of steel that can be made in all sorts of different types of way, but this particular site, it relies on the, if you like, the traditional way, which is coke and iron ore at the bottom of the furnace, creating what they call is primary steel, and that's infrastructure steel for our rail tracks, for girders, for construction, for big infrastructure projects. And so, yeah, the government on Saturday met, I think it's only, 6 times since World War II or something, to see about what they could do. And the reason for that is it does appear that the management in charge, the Chinese management in charge of the site, were playing fast and furious with access to the coking coal to keep this furnace alive. And if that furnace went out and the iron ore at the bottom of it solidified, then that would have possibly created cracks in the furnace, and then we would have been dealing with a pile of bricks on the ground, and never any more shall be said. But so they have put a stay on that. And in some respects, we, you know, under both Labour and Conservative governments, we have seen where contracted companies to do a job for, if you like, the infrastructure of the country, and you can include the rail companies in this, have had to step in when they were going to topple over in order to make sure that the train services kept running. And that's happened with a lot of different train companies. It doesn't mean that they continue to be run by the government. In most cases, they've passed back to the rail industry and the rail sector commercially to run. But in this case, yeah, they've taken a stand on this. Now, I think that there is a bit of a case for saying that for a foundation industry like this, particularly at this juncture, finding a way through this to keep it going and running it until maybe an alternative comes along is the right thing to do. If it didn't exist, then we'd be the only sort of major country in Europe who wouldn't have been able to create this sort of steel and be beholden possibly to other countries, but particularly China for imports down the road. And I think this raises all sorts of questions about our ability as a country to provide for our critical infrastructure, whether it's in this maybe old school type of industry or even in the new school of technology.
And Fraser, what do you think this means for relations with China?
With China, well, we've just been angry words expressed here, but right now we've got Douglas Alexander's in China, or rather Hong Kong, right now, and this is after a procession of kind of European ministers. They're almost as if, OK, America's not treating us very well, so let's see if we can cozy up to the Chinese a bit. So we're in dangerous territory now. We're in one level, we're thinking, OK, let's see what deals we can do. Another level, they're thinking, OK, we should never have trusted you, Beijing guys with their steel, in the kind of first place. So I think we're entering an interesting period with relations with China. And I think Xi Jinping, who's on a tour right now of other Asian countries, positioning himself as a friend versus the American foe, is trying to see how much you can shake out diplomatically from all of this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky balancing act. Thank you both. We'll come back to you very shortly. Well, there's been no end to the bitter bin strike in Birmingham today after workers overwhelmingly rejected the offer on the table from the council. Industrial action over pay has been ongoing, as I'm sure you know, for over a month now, leaving thousands of tonnes of rubbish uncollected with warnings of a public health emergency. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has this report from the city.
For 6 weeks, the council and the union have been locked in dispute, and all the while, rubbish swirls on the city's streets.
They've cleaned it. When was it? A couple of days ago, Armand? A couple of days ago. And it's already starting back.
The community litter pickers have had enough, desperate for a deal that could end this. But a deal is far from done.
You are presumably well used to sites like this now.
You know what? It was bad before, but now it's just colossal. Now we can't deal with it.
And what's your message to the council, to the elected leaders who run this city?
They need to sort this out. They need to sort the bin strike out ASAP. We've also got a massive increase in rats and mice, I was telling you. Even in the houses, residential houses, we've got people in our groups telling us that the rats are coming into the house and stuff. I've got a mice infestation where I live as well now. I didn't have one before. I understand where the bin men's frustration is, but this isn't fair on the rest of us. It needs to be fixed. We need to come to something and they need to fix it straight away.
Birmingham has had a tough time recently. This is the third bin strike in under 10 years. And in 2023, the council declared itself effectively bankrupt. This dispute threatens to cost the city millions of pounds.
Even when piles of rubbish like these are collected, they still need to be processed. Neighbouring councils have been coming in to try and help, as have private companies. And it's the cost of clearing that backlog which is mind-boggling. Waste removal experts have told us that the cost of the clean-up could be in excess of £200 million.
Clearly, we have to pick up the bill. So what has this council learned over the years? They've learned nothing. Yeah, every time that you're getting into a strike, it's we as the general public have to pick up the bill. Our bills are going up and our services are going down. So we're frustrated.
The MP here is frustrated too.
Do you think that Unite Union has been willing to put the public's health at risk to get the deal that it wants, knowing what will happen if the bins aren't collected?
I can't speak for Unite. What I can say is I wrote to the City Council raising my concerns very early on about the public health issue, because, you know, we cannot see vermin on the streets in the way that we've seen people writing to me, sending me pictures of cockroaches, of rats.
Any hopes that a deal could be reached fell away when union members voted overwhelmingly to reject the latest offer. The council said it was incredibly disappointing. The government urged the union to call off the strikes.
There is a huge amount of anxiety in this city among people whose homes have got rats in them and mice in them. You are putting the public's health at risk, aren't you, and using that as leverage to get your deal over the line. Do you accept that?
No, absolutely not. We're not leveraging the public in any way whatsoever. What's happening here is that our members are facing a pay cut. It's not our deal. This is of the council's making. The council have put forward a proposal that would lead to a sharp drop in pay for our members. So you are absolutely right. There's massive anxiety. But how about the anxiety of thinking, am I going to be able to pay my rent and my mortgage?
The clear-up has begun here, but without a deal, the rubbish will return. Birmingham's problems will begin to pile up all over again. Nick Martin, Sky News, Birmingham.
Right, let's bring Caroline and Fraser back in, shall we? Caroline, I mean, I feel like, you know, it's been a few weeks and we are still talking about this. Where does this end? Obviously, deal rejected today.
Well, it's got to end with stopping the strike and getting back to work. And I think Unite have put themselves in a really bad place on this, to be honest. I mean, to have a state of emergency almost because of public health concerns announced a few weeks back, and whilst it's been all-out strike since around March the 11th or something, this has been going on intermittently since January, for goodness something. I mean, there's tons and tons, thousands of tons of rubbish out there. Now, apparently, and this would be really great for us to all know, there are disputed figures on numbers of staff and money and everything between Unite and the council. Unite say it's hundreds of people that are going to lose up to £8,000. The council says around 17 people might be affected by something up to £6,000. At the heart of this seems to be a particular role of waste recycling collection officers. No other council in England has this role in their refuse service. It is, as far as I understand, unique to Birmingham. And maybe in the days when things seem better, you could have all these roles. But actually now, with what the council's facing, they're having to restructure. They're offering retraining, they're offering people there to pay for the next 6 months while they sort this out. But fundamentally, this is so bad, I think, in terms of the communities in Birmingham who are suffering. And, you know, a deal needs to be done. It stands almost, in some ways, in contrast to Unite GMB and community unions' role over in Scunthorpe near Grimsby in terms of what's happening with steel, where I think actually the unions have come out of that really well.
Bins matter, you know, people vote on bins, don't they?
Yeah, of course. There's one basic thing you want the council to do is to clear your bins. But I think the theme here is that the people of Birmingham are so badly served by our local authority. Birmingham Council is the largest local authority in the whole of Europe. And I think it's just too big, it's too unwieldy. If you look at Manchester, there's something like 10 local authorities covering the Manchester area. What an incredible city Manchester is. Birmingham is really sort of saddled by a council which is too big, too ineffective. And this isn't hardly the first problem they've had. So I think what needs to be restructured isn't just the rubbish collection, but Birmingham Council itself.
It is our second largest city, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, but my point is, does it need to be all run by one massive unitary authority? I mean, let's look at Manchester. You've got Richard Leese there, did an incredible job. All these other councils working together. If a council covers there's something like 1.1 million people. One council covering 1 million people. Now, where else in Europe is that the case?
Do you think central government will be blamed rightly or wrongly for this? In any way?
Look, I think at the moment it's seen as a localised problem. And I think if you went to the sort of people on the streets, they'd be saying, you know, why isn't the council sorting this out? Probably, as I say, I don't think the unions have put themselves in a good place on this. But again, it also comes at the back of this, is not just for Birmingham, but a number of different local authorities, some run by Labour, some run by the Conservatives, large and small, who found themselves in massive financial difficulties. And, you know, some of them, you know, Birmingham was on the brink of bankruptcy, others have pretty much nearly gone over that line. So there's a fundamental issue here as well about financing of local government and what are we financing them for? And I think Fraser's right. You know, the one thing you hear from people about what we want is the bins and our potholes filled. That's not all when you press people on that, but that's the thing that spontaneously comes to people's minds.
Yeah. Thank you both. We will come back to you. There's lots to talk about this evening. You're watching The Politics Hub coming up. Rishi Sunak's closest parliamentary aide when he was Prime Minister is among 15 people charged today with election betting offences. We'll have the latest next.
They are pushing forward, trying to get people to disperse.
What Prince Harry wanted to do was to eject me.
Is that your opinion?
It is. It is.
They were serious, coordinated attacks.
It's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
The number of patients is increasing.
It's been quite some day.
Hey, what country are you
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
You've gone viral.
Have ever had such a reaction.
It's just incredible.
Since the Oval Office meeting, have they reached out to you?
If Ukraine asks for help and its allies decide to help, then that's the end of it.
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today. Beth Rigby from Sky.
You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
There could be some more painful decisions to come.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19, religion's nothing.
Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. A former aide to Rishi Sunak has been charged, along with 14 others, with betting offences relating to the timing of last year's general election. The 15 also includes a current Welsh Senedd member and a former police officer. Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, who I'm pleased to say joins me now. Serena, just firstly, run us through the story, because obviously this was something that we spoke about in the build-up to the election.
Yes, of course. Well, the Gambling Commission have announced today they're charging 15 individuals in connection with their investigation of allegations of cheating. So essentially bets placed about the timing of last year's general election. And the investigation had been going since June, so last year, so before the election was held, but essentially it focused on individuals using confidential info, specifically on knowing the timing of the election, so the election date, to gain an unfair advantage in the betting markets. Now, as you said, one of those was Craig Williams, a former Tory MP, but he was also a parliamentary private secretary to Rishi Sunak at the time, so very close to the Prime Minister. You also had Russell George, a serving minister of the Senedd of Montgomeryshire, and other party figures as well. Now, we've approached them all for comment, but this is an ongoing investigation, and they'll be appearing at Westminster Mag's Court Friday, 13th of June.
OK, thank you. And I also want to ask you about Tulip Siddiq, who obviously resigned as Treasury Minister last year. We spoke to her this morning. She says she's done nothing wrong, but there is a Bangladeshi arrest warrant for her.
Yeah, quite a complex story, but essentially this all stems from allegations that Tulip Siddiq essentially benefited from money that was corruptly taken out of Bangladesh. Well, those are the central allegations. Now, during the reign of Sheikh Hasina, who was the aunt of Tulip Siddiq, she had several connections to properties around London, and then those properties had connections back to her aunt's political party. So the Bangladesh Anti-Corruption Commission have several investigations in which they've actually named Tulip Siddiq as potentially part of that. And then over the weekend, that same commission said that an arrest warrant had been issued for Tulip Siddiq in Bangladesh. Now, she did respond today to these allegations from the commission. This is what she said.
No one from the Bangladeshi authorities has contacted me. The entire time, they've done trial by media. My lawyers proactively wrote to the Bangladeshi authorities. They never responded. I'm sure you'll understand, I can't dignify this politically motivated smear campaign with any contacts or any comments. It's a completely politically motivated smear campaign trying to harass me. There is no evidence that I've done anything wrong.
So essentially, her position is that this has all been conducted through the media. She says the Bangladeshi authorities haven't contacted her directly, and if they have solid evidence, she will get her lawyers to respond in due course. She, of course, resigned as a Treasury Minister, though, and when she was investigated by the Prime Minister's ethics advisor, while he said he didn't find any evidence of wrongdoing, essentially he said she should have known that there would be wider reputational damage of her connections, and he needed more evidence, or he wanted to see more evidence to fully find out what and where the money came from in connection to all of these properties. So I think this will be a story that potentially runs on. The Bangladeshi investigations are ongoing, and there are legal avenues they want to pursue. But Tulip Siddiq says she wants to see those evidence put straight forward to her before she comments further.
OK, Serena, not a straightforward story. Thank you so much for explaining all that. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. A committee of MPs rejects claims of two-tier policing during last summer's riots. I've been speaking to the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. And trapped in an endless nightmare, Sky News speaks to the victims of a controversial tax crackdown by HMRC that's led to a rise in suicide attempts. Hello, welcome back. Now, MPs investigating the police response into the summer riots following the Southport killings say there was no evidence of two-tier policing. The allegation came after suggestions during the riots that officers were more heavily handled with people on the right of the political spectrum. But a report published by the Home Affairs Committee concluded the level of response shown to the summer riots was entirely appropriate.
I heard, and what we all heard as a committee, was that there was exemplary bravery from the police on the ground. They were extraordinary. And there was no fear nor favour. They didn't police this in any way based on the political background. They policed it exactly appropriately for the level of disorder that there was. What happened afterwards, we found that the data hadn't been shared in the way it should, that intelligence didn't pick up that this was going to be the kind of disorder we saw. It started off that it looked like it would be peaceful protests. Quite understandable, everyone is entitled to protest, and this was such a shocking incident. But then what it turned into was a surprise, I think, to those on the ground when it became so violent in the way it did so quickly.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. Do you still believe that there is a two-tier policing system in this country?
I do, and I respectfully disagree with some of the comments in the report that was published today. I mean, you only have to look at some of the statistics. One of the most striking ones I've seen is the fact that more people were prosecuted for the riots in Rotherham last summer than for the decades-long grooming gang scandal that involved hundreds, maybe thousands of children in that town. And there are other instances that we uncover all the time. In justice, we saw what the Sentencing Council were planning to do with the guidance, where there would have been a more lenient route through the criminal justice system for ethnic minorities, faith minorities, women, transgender people, than for others, such as white Christian men. We saw the
Ministry of Justice... that has been changed.
Well, only because we intervened, but had...
Well, the government said they were going to intervene.
Had we not spotted it and worked, and the government agreed with us that there was a two-tier situation arising there. We've recently uncovered the fact that when you look at bail, there are guidelines which say that you should be prioritised for bail if you're an ethnic minority versus others, such as a white person. So there are a number of different instances. The evidence is there to back up the claim. But beyond that, it's very evident to me that millions of people in this country are worried that there is a creeping two-tier system, whether it's in the criminal justice system more broadly or in policing. And so it's absolutely right that we take that seriously. Why on earth would you want to see public trust and confidence decline in our system? We police by consent in this country. And so it's very important that you listen to the public. The public are worried about this, and the police take steps accordingly.
So why do you think it is that the Home Affairs Select Committee, which is chaired by a Conservative, have got this so wrong? You know, they say there's no evidence for two-tier policing after the Southport attacks. They say those claims are baseless and disgraceful. What have they got wrong?
Well, you'd have to ask them, wouldn't you? I mean, I've given you some examples where I've seen very clear instances of two-tier policing, and the government itself accepted that the Sentencing Council were pursuing two-tier sentencing guidelines, and therefore you turned and
But this is a specific instance of policing
it.
After the Southport attack that we're talking about here.
Well, I say, look at the response that you've seen, whereby so many people have been prosecuted in places like Rotherham and so few for other, I would argue, more egregious instances such as the grooming gang scandal. I mean, I would look at the way...
But that's a separate thing to what this Home Affairs Select Committee was looking at. I just want to focus on
I think that is the point.
Well,
I think that's... You obviously have to compare the response to the Southport tragedy, the attack, the riots that followed it, to other instances that have happened elsewhere in the country. I mean, I think if you were to look, for example, at how football is policed and how the police would intervene on, say, riots or criminal behaviour following a football match, and compare that to, say, how the police policed the post-October the 7th protests in London. And I think you would conclude that there was a clear disparity there, that, you know, a football hooligan would be quite rightly robustly treated, while somebody was able to, you know, shout appalling things, hold banners, shout anti-Semitic chants on the streets of London, and broadly speaking, got away with it. This is what is feeding the very deep sense of unfairness and resentment which undoubtedly exists in the country right now. And if, whether it's the Home Affairs Select Committee or the police want to turn a blind eye to that, I think that's a very dangerous path because, as I said earlier, we police by consent in this country, and that consent is fraying right now.
So to be clear, you're all saying that the Conservative chair who said that it is a grim reality that bad actors thought to exploit the unspeakable tragedy that unfolded in Southport, you think that she has got that completely wrong?
Well, I think it's wrong to say that there are not instances of two-tier policing. I think that is not borne out by the evidence.
OK, there's a lot to talk about, so I want to move on to some of these quite shocking reports that we've seen in the last couple of days about what's been going on in prisons. One is the 3 officers that were attacked by the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber with cooking oil and homemade weapons. And another is at HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire, where an inmate has been arrested on suspicion of murdering another inmate, a convicted killer, in prison. I mean, what is going on in our prisons? Are our prisons fit for purpose?
Well, these are 2 very concerning incidents, and I think they do reveal the crisis that's in our prisons right now. They both suggest, in different ways, that governors are not in control of our prisons. I think the governors need to regain control of our prisons, and that means having a much tougher regime. It means putting the safety of prison officers first, not the welfare of criminals. Some prison governors have bowed to court judgments, which have tried to restrict what they can do in the way that they manage prisoners. I think there's a fear of political correctness at times as well. There isn't correct equipment, even very basic things like the availability of stab vests for officers. That 100% should be available. That's just a symptom. You know, the root cause is more worrying than that.
And the other on the front line should have stab vests.
Absolutely. That's what the union has called for, and I support that fully.
I guess the problem in prisons didn't appear in the last 9 months. You know, there have been systemic failings that have been going on for much, much longer than that. When the Conservatives were in power, you were in government. You know, are the Conservatives partly responsible for this?
I don't think this is a easily party political point. This has been going on for some time. The report written by Ian Aitchison, a superb report that looked into this, was done several years ago. Jonathan Hall, the reviewer of terrorist legislation, wrote a similarly good report more recently. And so this is a deeply concerning issue. It needs to be tackled. I think it is escalating. And I really urge the Ministry of Justice and those governors who I think have turned a blind eye to this to get a grip now, because it's reaching boiling point. And it's important to the country, because I don't want to see people being forcibly converted, potentially radicalised, and then later released onto our streets. But the most urgent issue is the safety of prison officers. These are brave people, public servants, doing a difficult job, often for not very much money. They deserve our support and protection, and they shouldn't be going to work fearful of these kind of conditions. So they should have the equipment that they need, and the regime should be in place so these individuals are actually contained. And if you're making a decision as governor, it should always be that the prison officer's safety comes first, not the welfare of criminals.
OK, let's bring our panel back in, Caroline Flint and Fraser Nelson. Fraser, what do you think Robert Jenrick is up to?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, you asked him for evidence that UK's got 2-tier policing. He couldn't really provide it. And to me, this isn't so much about what's happening in the British streets, but more what's happening in the online debate, which I think is becoming a lot more influential in Conservative circles. It was Elon Musk who started referring to the Prime Minister as 2-tier Keir. This was a sort of taunt he had after the riots. And then various other right-wing groups started doing it. And then Robert Jenrick has come late to this, but he's kind of taken up this phrase, which is really popular in the digital right. But when asked to provide evidence, because when you think about it, it's an incredible claim to make that in this country you are treated differently if one skin colour or another, or whatever it was else that he's referring to. So it's a very potent accusation to make without any evidence. And he seems to keep making it without any evidence.
What do you think, Caroline?
Well, it makes me wonder if we hadn't had a general election last year, what would have happened under Rishi Sunak. I imagine in many respects, the police would have acted exactly the same in this situation. And I think conflating some of these really serious other criminal issues, like the grooming gangs, and I think there should be more done in terms of inquiries into some of those local authority areas where it took hold, and the recommendations, which were not enforced under the last Conservative government from Alexis Jay, need to be enforced and happen. But to conflate them all like this is really, I think, dangerous. Because it just plays to people's fears. And the truth is that, you know, police officers on the streets, as well as the general public, when these riots were kicking off, were facing people throwing missiles at them. So what are they meant to do? They were setting fire to buildings, whatever you think about the people in those buildings, which could have killed people, as well as we all saw on our screens, because they were so brazen about it, a criminal element walking into shops and stealing as much as they could while the chaos was going on. I think, actually, the court's meeting that summer round the clock to deal with these people and charge them. When you look at what the British public felt, whatever their views about immigration or anything else, they did not see themselves reflected in those rioters and were happy with what happened by the police. Having said that, there are comments in this report about just how prepared the police were for this sort of onslaught, and also the police getting, I think, clued up about social media, I think, as you've indicated, Fraser, because the way in which this contagion can take force and happen in terms of reality on our streets is something that, the police have to be better prepared for.
I think that was the most important takeaway from the report, actually. They were saying that in future, you need to tell the truth about these things. And if you don't, if you hesitate, then you create a vacuum which is filled by social media conspiracy theories. So I think this is quite difficult because they're used to dealing with media from the press. Now, the press will observe restrictions. The press will not come up with stuff that might be contempt of court. But right now, more people get their news from social media than from the press. This is something they can't control anymore. So the best remedy to online lies is to tell the truth and get it right first time.
OK, thank you both. We will be coming back to you. Now, 4 more people caught up in a controversial HMRC tax crackdown known as the loan charge have attempted to take their own lives over the last 18 months. That's on top of 10 cases of suicide which have already been reported to the authorities. Those affected by the scandals say it was like being trapped in an endless nightmare, as our political correspondent Amanda Acas reports, and a warning that Amanda's report does contain discussion of suicide throughout.
Ray Newton paid his unexpected £16,000 tax bill from HMRC, but when the threatening letters continued, it nearly destroyed him.
My wife actually left me. I was on antidepressant drugs. I was on sleeping pills. Our whole world was sort of falling apart. And one particular evening on a very stormy night, I was going to basically kill myself.
Ray was saved after a member of the public intervened. His ordeal began in 2016, after the Chancellor, George Osborne, announced contractors who'd had their salaries paid through tax-free loans in schemes marketed as HMRC compliant were liable for years of retrospective national insurance and income tax in a lump sum known as the loan charge. But 8 years after Ray's original bill, HMRC suddenly tripled it.
This is the bombshell letter last year. A total of $57,000. I just couldn't believe it, to be honest.
HMRC have now cancelled 12,000 of that, but Ray's chaotic experience is far from unique.
It's soul-destroying.
Stephen Bishop had reached a settlement to pay HMRC by direct debit, but they cancelled it without explanation, sent bills for wildly different amounts, and even dispatched an inspector to his home.
There have been times where I have thought that potentially taking my own life would be the only way out of this.
Since 2016, the loan charge has raised £4.2 billion for HMRC, with 25,000 cases settled. But another 40,000 individuals and 5,000 employers are yet to reach an agreement.
Ordinary people who are victims of mis-selling are suffering financial ruin and personal harm.
In opposition, Labour criticised the way HMRC pursued the loan charge, promising an independent review into its approach. But the review they announced in January will focus on how to get people to pay.
What the government announced and what they promised has turned into an internal HMRC stitch-up.
Do you think this is a cover-up?
Yeah, of course it's a cover-up. It's been covered up for a long time.
Sky News have discovered another 4 people affected by the loan charge have attempted to take their own lives in the past 18 months, bringing the total to 14. That's on top of the 10 suicides already reported to the authorities. HMRC say they take the well-being of all taxpayers seriously, and they made significant improvements to their service identifying and supporting customers who need extra help. The government insists the review is independent of the Treasury and HMRC, and they can't preempt its findings. But those caught by the loan charge fear the Chancellor's in no mood to throw them a lifeline. Amanda Acas, Sky News, Westminster.
And if you've been affected by any of the topics discussed in that report, a reminder that help is available. You can call Samaritans on their 24-hour helpline 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Still to come on the Politics Hub. After Rory McIlroy's career Grand Slam garners praise from the president, we'll take a look back at the times politicians have tried to bask in a bit of the post-sporting glow.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, the Birmingham bin strike rumbles on. Workers have rejected an offer from the City Council. The strike now entering its 6th week. Plus, questions over China's involvement in UK infrastructure after the government stepped in to save British steel. And after Rory McIlroy sealed the career Grand Slam, we'll be visiting the club where it all began in Northern Ireland. And I'll speak to winning Ryder Cup captain Paul McGinley. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor, free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, Northern Ireland's Rory McIlroy has completed his long-awaited career Grand Slam with his win at the US Masters tournament. It's a feat, of course, that only 5 others have managed before him. And the achievement even garnered the praise of keen golfer President Trump.
I have to congratulate Rory. That showed tremendous courage. He was having a hard time, but it showed great guts and stamina and courage. People have no idea how tough that is, and came back. He can be proud. I mean, actually, it's better for him that it happened that way, because that showed real courage. To have come back from what could have been a tragedy was amazing.
Donald Trump, though, is far from the first politician to heap praise on the sporting elite and bask in the winner's glow. Right, Caroline and Fraser are still here. Hopefully they haven't run off. I mean, do you think, can politicians kind of lead into this sporting prowess? Is it a good look, Fraser?
It's dangerous. I remember when George Osborne tried to give medals at the Paralympics, he was booed by the audience because they just thought a politician just shouldn't be there. We're trying to enjoy a sporting debate. What's this guy doing? So obviously, when you're invited there, it can be nice, but you can see when they try to hijack it, sporting fans notice instantly and hate it.
Yeah, because I mean, to be fair to Rishi Sunak, he was a genuine cricket fan. I think some of those styled it out slightly more than others.
Yeah, and I think on another level, actually, the public, you know, they want to see the sportsmen and women celebrated. That's what they're looking at. They're not really, when they see Tony Blair or John Major in the background, really thinking about them. They're just thinking, are these sports people getting due credit? But Gordon Brown, who actually lost his eye playing rugby, he actually apparently did try to get a pre-election sofa opportunity on Match of the Day. I don't think it happened, by the way, but, you know, there is this sort of leaning into it, I suppose, well. And I think in the 97 manifesto, we actually had in that we would put in a bid for the Olympics, which obviously ultimated with the 2012, although we weren't in power to see it through. So, yeah, I mean, sport, everyone likes to get behind the sport, don't they?
And the Olympics is useful, of course, if you're a unionist wanting to give votes in Scotland, then the Olympics is something that the whole country gets behind. I mean, the SNP prefer the Euros to the Olympics, so you get that element of politics as well.
Yeah, but I guess it must help the incumbent party, you know, if you've got... If people are in a good mood, if you won the World Cup, you might feel...
But you might lose the World
more
Cup
favourable about...
You might lose it too. That's the risk you take.
And Donald Trump is actually a golfer, I should say.
And the owner of golf courses up there in Scotland, which Michael always played in.
Yeah, so maybe he did manage to style that out. And it sort of feels like it's similar with pop singers as well. You know, when politicians try and get behind popular culture, I think you can tell when it's authentic or not.
Absolutely.
In fact, that is all we've got time for. Thank you both very much. That is it from us tonight. I will be seeing you tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Up next, it's The UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. And after that, The World Tonight. Thank you so much for watching. We will be back tomorrow.